James Tierney with TierneyEducation.com here, and we're going to present a 6-part informational video on select labor market indicators. This video is going to be on the longer side, so in the description below there are chapters for each 6 parts. Let's go and have a look. Let's start with the contents of this video presentation. We'll start with a quick overview of FRED. FRED stands for Federal Reserve Economic Data, and this is provided by the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank. We're then going to talk about what makes up the labor force, followed by the unemployment rate as a whole, and what exactly does the unemployment rate capture. We'll then talk about the labor force participation rate, the job openings and quit rates, and we'll finish with compensation. We'll try and figure out what it means when we see increases in private workers' compensation. Now, there may be a lot of terms that I said here that you're not 100% certain on their definitions, but don't worry about that. That'll be in this presentation as well. We'll start by looking at FRED, Federal Reserve Economic Data. As I said before, this is put out by the St. Louis Fed, and you can find it by going directly to fred.stlouisfed.org. As you can see down here, there are over 818,000 international and US time series. Time series data are just when we plot data over time, which we're going to see a lot in this presentation. If you're using FRED in the classroom or maybe as a presentation yourself, and you can't figure out how to do certain things with this program, feel free to post here in the comments, and I would love to make a tutorial video for you on that. As previously mentioned, FRED has a bunch of time series data. Again, time series data is plotted against time. So you'll always see on this horizontal axis different years or quarters or months or however you want to present your data. The great thing about FRED, again, fred.stlouisfed.org, you should go and check it out, is you can edit graphs, and you'll see that in a lot of the presentation I'm going to give today. You can download it, add it to a presentation, you can change the dates, you can do a ton of stuff. And in fact, this link up here where it says About FRED, under there, they have a ton of tutorials on how to use this program. Now, if there's something that you can't figure out, feel free to post it in the comments below, and I would love to make a tutorial video, as mentioned before, about FRED. Let's get into the content of this presentation. First, we're going to talk about the working age population and the labor force. By definition, the working age population consists of individuals 16 years of age or older. Now, the labor force is composed of everybody that is in that working age population who is either employed or unemployed. Now, being employed, that one's pretty straightforward. You have a job or you don't. However, the way that we define being unemployed can sometimes be a bit difficult for people to understand. So, to be considered unemployed, 2 things must be true. First, you're currently not working, which is what most people think of when they think of being unemployed. And the second is that you have to actively be looking for a job. What does it mean to be actively looking for a job? Well, I actually wrote a blog post on that, which you can find up there. So let's look at those data on a FRED graph. So I pulled this directly from the Federal Reserve Economic Data website, fred.stlouisfed.org, and I'm graphing them all on one single graph. So you can see we have the population, that working age population up here. We have our labor force, our employment, and our unemployment level. And so notice that the labor force, which is the blue line here, is simply just the addition of unemployed, which is the red line at the bottom, and the employed, which is the green line here. And there's clearly a gap between the labor force and the population level, and you can see that has grown over time, and that again is because we have a lot of people who are not in the labor force. Either they're going to school full-time, either they are retiring. There's lots of different reasons, which we'll get into when we talk about the labor force participation rate. Let's talk about the unemployment rate, which is arguably the most popular economic indicator. So by definition, the unemployment rate is the percentage of the labor force that is considered unemployed. But why is this number controversial? Well, first, some individuals are working part-time, but would rather be working full-time. And also some people have left the labor force altogether for a number of reasons, and yet they would rather be working. And so because of this, we try and capture the entire picture by having additional measures of labor underutilization. And so we're going to talk about those in this presentation as well. Graphically, what does the historical unemployment rate look like? Well, we see the big spike during the pandemic and it comes back down. We also see other recessions, which are denoted by these grayed out areas, where we see the unemployment rate go up. What we notice is right now, the unemployment rate at the time of this recording, 3.5%, is actually quite low historically, which is leading to a lot of other things that we're going to talk about with data going forward as well. As we mentioned, the unemployment rate can sometimes be controversial because it doesn't include certain individuals who are not working but want to be working. And so there are 6 different measures that are collected and reported for that underutilization of labor, right? Different types of unemployment rates. We actually call those U1, U2, all the way up to U6. And I graphed them all here. You can go to the report, which is linked in the comments below, to read more about it. However, what we care most about is just U3, which is the official number that you'll see reported. And you'll notice that's blue here, it's just the unemployment rate. And then U6, which tries to capture more of that population that is not in the labor force, but would rather be working. So we call these people discouraged workers, but also captures people who are working part-time, but would rather be working full-time. And you'll see that there's a gap between these two because we're capturing more people, but they do move in the very similar direction. So either way you want to use these data, you can. Just make sure that there are different types of unemployment rates that are reported that give us a little bit different information. Another important chart that I like to show my students when talking about unemployment is long-term unemployment. Specifically, the percent of the unemployed who have been unemployed for 27 weeks or longer. So 27 weeks is representing over a half a year they have been unemployed. And what we notice is post the financial crisis, we had a huge percentage of our workers that were unemployed for what we would consider long-term, over 6 months. And that slowly but surely was declining. And of course, we see a big dip right at the start of the most recent recession due to the COVID-19 outbreak. And that's because so many people were short-term unemployed. And then it peaked again like it usually does after a recession and is coming down. We're currently sitting at about the level we were pre-COVID-19 pandemic, but we still have a ways to go to try and get down to closer to that 10%, which we saw in the early 2000s. Now that we've talked about the unemployment rate, let's talk about the labor force participation rate. Again, we'll start with the definition. The labor force participation rate is the percentage of the working age population that is in the labor force. So it's just labor force over the working age population. We can see trends in this labor force participation because demographics and we see culture shifts here in the US. We'll begin by looking at the graph as a whole. And so these data start back in the 1940s. And you can see a ginormous increase in the labor force participation rate, going from under 60%, peaking at a little over 67%. Since about 2000, we have seen it start to decline for lots of reasons. And of course, during the most recent pandemic, a huge drop, and we're starting to climb back. However, we are still not even close to getting back to where we were pre-pandemic. And there's a lot of things that we could get into, which we won't completely in this video, but we will mention a few things. One thing that you will hear about in any introductory to macroeconomics course is how the labor force participation rates for men and women have changed over time. What we can notice here in the green is the labor force participation rate for men. And it has been steadily declining since the start of the data collection in the 1940s. From about 1945 up until about the year 2000, we saw the labor force participation rate for women increase at a much faster rate than what we saw the decrease in the male labor force participation rate. And what that did is that grabbed that labor force participation rate overall to increase during that time. Now, why was that the case? Well, there's a culture shift in the United States where we saw many more women entering the workforce. And that is why we see that increase in the labor force participation rate from that 1950s up and through about the year 2000. Since the year 2000, we've seen both men and women, both of their labor force participation rates slightly declining, which has led to an overall decline in the labor force participation rate. And of course, for both demographics, a sharp pull down during the COVID-19 pandemic and a slow recovery since then. We have no idea if we're going to see a bigger recovery. However, we don't believe we're ever going to see the peak of the labor force participation rate again as we start to see more and more individuals retiring or more individuals going back to school full time or just overall wealth in the United States increasing, which is leading to less people needing to enter the labor force. And so because of the aging population, a lot of times you'll see economists refer to the prime age labor force participation rate, meaning we're only looking at individuals between the ages of 25 and 54 years old. So we're stripping away those people who we would consider in retirement age and also stripping away those individuals we would consider in the college age years. So we're looking at those prime working years. And what we notice with that is, yeah, we're not back to the peak of where we were, say, in the late 1990s, but we have recovered over the pandemic and we have that upward trajectory possibly getting to that point. Now, personally, I don't believe we'll ever get back to that peak. However, we see that it is much more stable, it's much more stable data than the decline that we see in the overall labor force participation rate. Of course, we see the exact same increase, which can be almost entirely attributed to women entering the labor force. Let's now talk about job openings and quits, which is one of my favorite parts of macroeconomics. And one of my favorite reports is the Job Openings and Labor Turnover Survey, or JOLTS report. And it provides an insight into the demand side of labor, rather than the previous data we've looked at, which provides an insight into the supply side. When we say demand side of labor, that's the businesses, the firms that are looking to hire individuals. Whereas the supply side are when we're supplying our labor, if we're going and we're working at McDonald's or at a university. And so the JOLTS defines job openings as all positions that are opened, also known as not filled, at the end of the month. Quits are employees who have just left voluntarily. So not employees that have left involuntarily, they have voluntarily left. And you can find more information on the JOLTS report if you go to bls.gov/JLT. So one of the things we can do in FRED is we can take two separate data and put them together. And so this one, I took the unemployment level and job openings. I took unemployment level over the job openings from the JOLTS report, so we can see how many individuals of unemployed are there per job opening. And you can see how this has changed since the year 2000. And of course, during a recession, we see an increase, meaning that there are more people unemployed per job opening. And then during non-recessionary periods, it falls down, peaks again, and then it's fallen since the most recent recession in the pandemic. We see it's leveled out during 2022 and maybe starting to see a slight tick up. Who knows? But what this is showing us is how many number of unemployed individuals are there per job opening. We can also look at overall quits and job openings rate. What we mean by rate is so the job openings rate is going to be how many job openings are there as a percentage of overall jobs in the economy, and quit rate is the percentage of people who are quitting of those that are employed. And let's talk about both of these separately. We'll start with the job openings rate. That's the blue one that's a little higher. And what we've seen here is we've seen a huge increase in the amount of job openings. A lot of businesses are looking to hire post-pandemic. Now, one caveat that I like to tell my students is this may be so much higher than it has been previously because the cost of posting a job opening is actually quite low. Especially since the invention and the increase and the expansion of the internet, I can simply say, hey, I need more tutors or more mentors for Tierney education. And maybe I'm not even actively interviewing, but it's still there and it is a job opening. So we have to take these data slightly with a grain of salt. However, you can see that it has been increasing since the end of the financial crisis, which is good. It means that we have more businesses who are out there looking for individuals to work. The quit rate, again, is showing the percentage of those who are working that are quitting month to month. And that's usually pretty steady during times that are good, these non-recessionary times, slightly increasing as the economy is getting better. And of course, that's going to plummet during a recession because you don't want to quit if you don't think your job prospects are good. And since the pandemic, we've seen a much higher level of this quit rate. And that could be for a bunch of things. One, we know the job market right now is really hot. A lot of people are hiring. We see that with the job openings rate. But also, a lot of people during the pandemic were able to think of what I may want to do elsewhere. And so as we see this quit rate elevated, that's actually a good sign for the economy because it means individuals believe that the job market and that the economy is good enough that if they quit, they can find something new. The last chart I want to go over, the last thing of this presentation, is the change in wages and salaries. These data are going to come from the National Compensation Survey, or the NCS, and it provides comprehensive measures of employer costs for employee compensation, which includes wages and salaries, and also benefits. And this is important, especially now during the time that I'm recording this, because when we see increases in overall compensation, that can lead to the increases in the price of goods and services that are being provided by the business, because labor is a huge input cost to most businesses. And this, of course, is going to lead to higher levels of inflation, which is a future topic that we'll cover. So how have prices changed over the past year? Well, we can see that there was a steady increase, this is year over year, from the financial crisis until the COVID-19 outbreak. However, since COVID, we've seen a huge spike in the year-over-year change, topping out at almost a 6% annual change in the compensation. Now, this is the nominal change, which is the number that you would see on your paycheck, not adjusted for inflation or anything like that. But this is one of the leading causes of the current inflation that we are seeing here in the United States and around the globe. Of course, there are lots of other reasons we may see inflation, but increases in workers' pay is going to lead to higher costs for businesses, and they will in turn be increasing their prices as well. So there you have it, a quick overview of some select labor market indicators. I hope you enjoyed this longer format of a video. If you have any input, please put it in the comments below. I'd also appreciate a subscribe because I'm going to make more videos like this for my economics students that I'm currently coaching and tutoring. And if you're interested in any coaching or tutoring, either here in State College, home of Penn State University, or virtually, simply head on over to tierneyeducation.com and set up a free 30-minute consultation. Thank you so much. Can't wait to see you again.